Welcome to 60 minutes of unscripted .NET entertainment. Our mission is to empower you, the .NET community, to achieve more. I'm your host this week, Cam Soper, with co-hosts David Pine and Myra Wenzel. And we would like to welcome today's guest, David McCarter. David, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, I'm David McCarter, also known as .NET Dave, and I've been around the community, around coding for a really long time, and I've been using .NET before it even came out, and write about .NET, speak about .NET, tour the world speaking about .NET, and lots more. I have my own website that's been around since '94. I have my own show now. We had on Saturday called Rockin' the Code World, where I reach up to about anywhere up to like 18,000 people per show. So that's really exciting. And lots more. So
I see you're wearing an appropriate hat today.
Yes, C#. Scott Hunter gave me this hat. So
I love it. I've got a shirt just like it.
There's very few of these hats in existence, and I was able to get one. So
that's awesome.
Awesome.
And you said 1994 for your blog? Or your website?
Yeah, in 1994. I actually started it with Gary Carl Franklin, and in 1994 I was picking back off of Carl Franklin's server back in '94, and so that's where I started my first site. Yeah, back when we did websites in Notepad, right?
Well, I was going to say, so I'm sure. So if you're going to have a website in '94, it's got to sport the marquee tag and the background MIDI file, right?
Yeah. And the counter. Don't forget the counter. Every page had a counter on it to prove to people are actually looking at the page, right?
I love that. That's amazing. 94. I think I was 10. Not to date myself or anything, but
I hate you, David. Our David, not David McCarter. David Pine, I hate you.
Awesome.
All right. So with that, David Pine, you have some I almost called it a checkup doc. You have related bits to share with us this week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So
let's do it. Let's roll.
Do it.
Well, no, wait. Let's roll the little intro. Why do we have it made if we're not going to roll it? There you go.
That's amazing. This is already a very, very Monday show. Ironically, all of our shows are on Monday. Cool.
I'm having a case of Mondays. I noticed that our tweet went with the wrong URL, so I'll try to notify people that were waiting for this show as well.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. I'm certain. So, so event counters are what this article that we're going to share is basically going to talk to an aspect of code quality. So it's related to our conversation with the real .NET Dave, because code quality, there's various aspects of that, and performance is certainly one of those things. So event counters is a replacement for performance counters. Performance counters were specific to Windows, but now with .NET, as of Core 3.0, so a long time ago, event counters were created, and they've been added on, and there's a whole set of well-known event counters that you can wire up to. But essentially what they do is they tether to an event source, and you can have many event sources. And with those event sources, you can in process use an event listener to register and receive events, anything from an event counter source. And then out of process, you can use tools like .NET counters or .NET trace, and you can write your own. So there's different ways, you can work with this API to, create your own event counters for things that might be pertinent to you, things that, like the number of GC cycles, the total number of requests, anything that you can imagine, any sort of performance-based aspect of your application can be, tied to this implementation. And you can...
Can you track website visits and maybe display it in like a little odometer GIF
Yes,
on your website?
yes. Actually, that is
Bottom of the
something you can
page.
totally do. Yeah, some of the examples that we have here in this article, I don't know if we shared the URL or not, but we should do that. We've got an event source here. This attribute kind of gives a name, and the implementation is minimal event source counter, since we're good at naming things, but it's a subclass of event source. And this one's going to be specific to the request time. So how long does it take to process a request? And the display units is milliseconds. And as the request comes through, given a URL, you can put the elapsed milliseconds, and then you'll just write that to the counter. And then consumers of that would be able to consume it and, get the request processing time. And again, this is just one example of how to do it. This article goes in more depth, talking about conditional counters, explores the API. It talks to the actual examples that we have in the box, from the .NET Core runtime itself or .NET runtime. So it's pretty interesting, and we hope that people will try it out and let us know, maybe use some of the ones that exist, and go from there.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, let's jump from that into David's talk for our hallway track. All right, David, the other David, the David we like. What do you got for us this week, David?
Well, code quality is a big subject, and it's getting bigger and bigger, I think. And what I mean by bigger is that there's a lot more to think about than like even in the early days of .NET. In the early days of .NET, it wasn't as well. Yeah, there's just wasn't as many tools and other things available to us like we have today. And so there's lots of and we need to use those tools because they help us do things faster, right? And but the one thing I want to talk about really quick, and this is one slide that I show in my conference talks, and I actually recently wrote an article about this. And so before we talk about the code, let's talk about us, right? Because to me, code quality always starts out with us, right? Demand quality in yourself, right? Because the software engineering world changes every freaking day, and we have to keep up with it. And there's all these new things that come along to help us with code quality and code performance and things like that. So we have to demand that we keep learning those things, either by, reading blog posts, attending sessions like this, going to conferences, watching Pluralsight. There's lots of ways to keep up with code quality yourself, right? And so, but it has to start with us, right? Because no one's going to make us do it, right? We have to make it happen as developers. And the reason I point that out is because we're going to be the ones ending up fixing it, right? And so, all the managers and PMs, they don't fix this stuff. We have to fix it, right? And so it's super important to us to make sure that, it's driven by us in the first place, right? And then after that, then it goes into the code quality of the code that you write, right? And that has to be a constant mantra on your head. Is this code, before you check in, is this code up to snuff with quality and performance and things like that before you even check in? And I have a workflow. I describe it in video and on my website about what my workflow is, before I check in any code file, right? And I use the same workflow no matter where I go. And that's the reason that I rarely get tickets from QA, because, I follow my own workflow that I've found, during the, many years I've been a software engineer, really, really works, right?
So are you going to be covering that today?
Yeah.
Your workflow, awesome. Yeah, I was just going to say that this reminds me of kind of a related mantra. I remember earlier in my career, I don't remember if it was an article or a video I saw. I'm certain it wasn't one of my mentors, but someone had said that you should code like the next person who's going to read your code is a psycho killer. That way, you don't want to upset them, right? You want them to be as happy and pleasant as possible. So they see your code and it's happy. So don't throw, crap over the wall, so to speak, right?
Well, I don't want to upset myself, right?
Exactly.
Because I don't look at that code, 6 months or a year later, going, "Who the hell wrote this?" Right?
Yeah, it's always fun when you do that and you're looking at the code. You're going, "Who the hell wrote that?" And then wait, yeah,
that was me. Right? Get blame says you did, right?
Right. And the other thing is, because I've been doing contracting, mostly in the last 10 years, is that when I leave a contract, I don't want anybody there going, "Oh my God, Dave wrote this crappy code. We're never hiring him back as a contractor," right? And so, especially as a contractor, you have kind of have to look good, right? And because unfortunately, most code from contractors, everybody looks at goes, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad he's gone or she's gone because this is terrible," right? And so we don't want that, right? And then on top of all this, the third thing that I do, unfortunately, almost daily, is demand quality in the apps you use, right? Because I tell people all the time. I told people this at the Code Quality Conference that I ran on Friday. Nothing's going to change unless you make noise, right? And so if something bugs you in the Twitter app or Facebook app or something, you need to contact them either through tech support or publicly shaming them on Twitter or something like that, which I prefer to do. And I'm not saying they're going to fix it, right? Because I bitched to OneNote for years before they finally fixed something like last month. It took them years to fix one minor thing that I wanted them to do, right? But it happened, right? And so so we have to make noise. And also, making noise applies to when you're at work, right? If you're seeing something that isn't quality, which I have tons of stories about this, you need to step up and say, wait a minute, maybe we should look at this or fix this before it goes out because we're going to lose customers or whatever, right? And so quality starts with us.
Absolutely. And I was going to say to that one, demanding quality in the apps that you use, that's I think something that's become very, very prevalent through the years. I think lots of users are very vocal about voicing their concerns, and awesome.
Yeah. And unfortunately, talking about the app aspect, I really, really wish that most apps which don't do this makes it super easy to submit these kind of things, right? Most apps or websites hide it from you because you probably don't want to hear from you, right? Or they make it really difficult, or they most of the time when you send in something, you just feel like it's going to a black hole. It's never going to be seen, right? And so I really appreciate apps that really do a good job at that. And the app that always comes to the top of my mind when I speak about that is Visual Studio, right? Visual Studio has an awesome reporting mechanism, right? That you can report features, feature requests, or bugs and things like that, via Visual Studio, right? And when you report a bug, it also uploads a bunch of stuff about your system and Visual Studio and things like that to help the people on the other end look at it, right? But then, they have a web page you can go to and see the status of everything you've submitted and keep track of it. And they send you emails on it, things like that. And I really, really, if anybody's from Microsoft that's not in the programming land listens to this, you need to adopt this framework, because all the other apps that I use at Microsoft does a very poor job at submitting things like this, right? Very poor. And I've tweeted many times before, I wish all products at Microsoft use the same framework, right?
That's awesome. That's really good feedback. And I will say that I haven't really thought of it that way, but I agree. I think that it is a great model to follow. And I, even being inside of Microsoft, have used that same feedback mechanism, and that channel, that dialogue that opens up does work.
Yeah. And, I do wish, now when the ticket goes in, and then they look at it and they put it in for review, or they say it's a duplicate or things like that. The one thing I will say about the people who actually look at it, I wish they would work with the person submitting it harder, right? Instead of just closing it because not enough information, which they tend to do a lot. So that's the one thing. But other than that, I think the mechanisms that Visual Studio has put in is really awesome, and I think Microsoft should adopt that everywhere. Yeah.
Awesome.
So, what do you want to talk about next? Any questions yet?
It's your show, David. No, we've had a lot of interest, a lot of things, a lot of people talking about what they think code quality means and clean architecture means. So I think we're getting we're getting antsy to see the code, David.
Yeah. So we probably should start off. There's lots of different things that we have available to us now, and I'll try to get them all in 45 minutes. It'll be tough though, but these days in Visual Studio, the first place you need to start is the code analysis, right? Visual Studio code analysis has changed over the years. Before it was, in the beginning, it was FX Cop, which wasn't public to the world. And Style Cop wasn't either. And then they made it public, or maybe it was just Style Cop that wasn't public to the world. I forget which, but we had FX Cop in the beginning, right? And now that's changed to the editor config file, right? And and that's what the analyze portion of Visual Studio now uses, is the editor config, instead of the FX Cop and Rosalind stuff they were using before. So we really have to start there, and Visual. And that's done by this editor config file here that you can see. This is my editor config. I posted it in the wrong YouTube channel, the link to it, but I can do it later. But this is my editor config file, and this is where you set up all the rules that are going to be used in that solution, right? And the good thing I really like about editor config as opposed to FX Cop is, of course, you check this into source control, so everybody using the project is using the same rules, right? And that's number one important when you're trying to release good quality code, is everybody's on the same page and not using something different. So the editor config really helps with that. The editor config, I will say, is a bit confusing because there's not like a central location where all the rules are, and I've worked really, really hard at scouring Microsoft sites and other sites to create a more comprehensive editor config. And my editor config is, I wrote it down, 1,743 lines.
Wow, that's a lot of lines. It seems as though we should ask of the community to build a website that encompasses all of the various, editor config things. So maybe it's like an online editor config, website. You just go there and you say, here's a drop down. Maybe I'm doing .NET or whatever it is. Here's the common options. Here's all the stuff pertinent to the thing that you're working on.
Yes,
or JavaScript or Python or whatever it is, right? Because editor config, it's my understanding that that's global. That's not just for C#, right? So okay,
it is global. But for .NET, I wish Microsoft had a one page to go to and look at all this stuff, and they don't, unfortunately. And that's kind of why I worked really hard on getting everything into one file. At least you can see what your options are, right?
I did just share a link where we do have documentation on this, actually, on the editor config. And for .NET coding conventions, we've got additional information there actually as well that kind of talks to all the different rules. I believe all of them, anyways.
And the one thing I do when I add things to the editor config is I always add the actual rule on top of the setting, right? Because if you look at a lot of things that Microsoft puts in, there's no like documentation, I guess, right? And so whenever I put in a rule, I always put the number and I always put what that title is for that rule. So at least it will give you some information so you don't have to go looking up on the Microsoft website, right? So, and also on top of the editor config, and we didn't have this in the beginning of Visual Studio, but we do now. You can also, I prefer using it the way I just showed you, but you can just open it up in the new editor config viewer that's built inside of Visual Studio. and is more of a, a GUI for looking at all the settings, right? And so you have your white space settings, you have your code style settings where you can disable, enable things, things like that. You have naming style, which is of course super important when you're naming variables and methods and classes and things like that.
And then some of the descriptions are there too, so it is.
Yeah.
I think the GUI is a little bit more intuitive, right? That's kind of a
for what it understands. Yes, it does do that. And then you have basically all the analyzers, and that's kind of what I was showing you towards the middle and the end of the file, is they all show up here, right? And so, and you can see here, these are this, the CA specified culture info that, I put into some of these things. And,
so out of curiosity, right? So we're talking about like the editor config and imposing kind of like a shared set of, naming conventions and how we should manage white space and, different code style preferences and things like that. How does this relate directly to code quality? What's your opinion on that?
Well, what this does is it basically tells you during either build time or if you choose to do analyze yourself, like you can go up here and do analyze, run code analysis on solution, and it will run the analysis right for you, and then everything will show up in the error list window, right? So that's the first thing. And the cool thing, and I tend to be a lot more anal about rules and things like that, but you can go in here and let me look at some of the analyzers if I can find one that's not a warning. Yeah, here's one that's an error, right? So this one is CA 2201, do not raise reserve exception types, which I see people do all the time, and they shouldn't be doing that. And the cool thing is you can set it as an error, which will break the build.
Oh, right? I love that. I love that.
Yes. So when the developer compiles, it's going to break, right?
Or if they even had it set as warnings, and then you had warnings being treated as errors, that would work then the same way.
Exactly.
We do have a question here from one of our longtime viewers, Fuels Enable. They're asking, can the editor config be used to force string interpolation to specify the culture info? And I'm curious about that as well. I don't know if there's anything native, but I do think, I know for sure you could build one, right? You could build an analyzer.
You could definitely build one. I don't think it, I think there might be some, but there's definitely not a lot. And especially with the interpolation, right? Because that's kind of new. So I think there is some for the string format, but I'm not aware of any for the string interpolation yet. Yeah. And you brought up something that's important, is that the old way of doing analysis was with FXCOP, and FXCOP was kind of like a black box, written by Microsoft, and it wasn't that easy to change, so therefore most people didn't do it. And so the one thing that I will have to say that the Visual Studio team did really well is to do these analyzers, because now anybody can build an analyzer, right? It's not just the teams at Microsoft or the people who really want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to freaking do it, right? So anybody can do analyzers now and add them in as the analyzer package and go and use them, right? And the last time I talked to someone at Microsoft, I haven't tested this yet, but last time I talked to somebody in Visual Studio team, they said the newer version of the editor config GUI actually will pull these settings from the analyzer and stick them into your editor config. So that's really important, because that's one thing that was really frustrating me at the beginning. That wasn't happening, right? And that's why I had to go look up all those things and make a 1700 line editor config file, because that wasn't happening in the beginning. But they're saying that happens now, but I haven't tested it yet. But that's a good thing too, right? And so
now we did. I'm sorry, David, didn't mean to cut you off. We did get a comment, and I'm not sure who made the comment. It was way back on the chat scroll. But there were a couple of comments about handling like this editor config file across different IDEs, right? Because you got some people that use you got some people that of course use Visual Studio, and then you've got some that use Code and some that use Writer from JetBrains. Do you know of any good way to I don't know, I guess canonize these Visual Studio editor config across multiple IDEs?
I have not looked into that because I really only use Visual Studio. So I can look into that and write an article about it if I can find something worth writing an article about. But that I will definitely put that on the list because that's important, right? And of course, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one thing about the editor config is since it's under the source control umbrella, it's kind of implicitly available to each individual developer's IDE, right? So like however they configure it or use it, it's source controlled. So they can do a pull request, say here's updates for, maybe there's something specific to writer or code or whatever it is.
Right.
It should all just kind of work, right?
Yes. And so you can use the same file, of course, across your entire enterprise or through just a solution, or because it kind of works off of the folder hierarchy kind of thing, right? Anything under this folder that they see an editor config, that's what's being used by Visual Studio, right? And I think you can nest editor configs. Not that I've actually seen anybody do that, but I'm not sure about that. But so the first thing is to make sure you have the person who's kind of in charge of code quality in your team kind of manages this. I said this when I talked in my talk on Fridays that I created a new title for myself. I call myself a code quality czar, right? Because this is so important. I think that there needs to be somebody on every team or every company this is what they think about all day, right? Because this is really, really important. And as we go forward in software engineering, because, we don't want to have apps go down, we don't want to have problems and things like that. And this is more and more important. And so whoever's your code quality czar needs to kind of be in charge of what these settings really are. And then when they do this, if they change them, then automatically everybody gets the new file and does the new rules, right? And so not only is it really important to make sure you do this during the build, when you're building locally, like in Visual Studio, this is unfortunately, I don't see a lot of companies do this needs to be part of your continuous integration also, right? Every time you do a build, on your build server or your continuous integration in GitHub or something like that, this needs to be part of it, right? And you need to stop any releases if you're getting too many errors or warnings, right? And I'm sure that's configurable, but I don't see people doing this. And I was thinking about this morning that way back in the early 2000s, I worked at a company with one of my best friends here in San Diego, and this is what we did with FX Cop. If the code came in and it had too many errors and warnings, we stopped the release of it and we went back and got it fixed and kept going through that cycle until it was, an acceptable number of, things that we're seeing in the violations.
So
it has to be.
I guess I'm just taking a step back here. There was a question earlier that came in, and again, it's back in the earlier history of the chat. But the individual was asking, like, as it relates to code quality, like, what's the number, like the most nested if statements? And I jokingly responded with like 1 million nested if statements, because I thought that was humorous. But something like that isn't actually covered by these editor config settings, right? So
I don't think so. Yeah.
And it's ironic that this person's thinking of that as code quality, and I do as well. So like, how do you bridge that gap? Like, so you've got automation, you've got the editor config, you have all these things coming together, and you're the czar. You're in there saying this is it's got to be this way. So what how would you handle something like that? Someone says, here's a pull request that has a state machine that's got all these nested if statements. Go. Well, how would you handle that? You're fired or not?
Well, I wouldn't say you're fired. I would definitely sit down with the developer and talk to them about nested ifs and refactoring, right? Because whenever you see nested ifs, that screams to me refactoring, right? And those nested ifs need to be multiple methods and things like that, and not the ifs like that, right? So yeah, there's not an editor config that I'm aware of, and that's kind of where one of the other things that needs to be done and done better, at least at the companies I work at, is code reviews, right? And so things like that will be picked up with the code review. Is someone asking about your duck?
No, I was going to bring this up because it relates to the contextually to this. So this is an inanimate object, a rubber ninja ducky. But earlier in my career, I was also taught to talk to my duck, right? Preemptively. I was supposed to read my code before I checked it in or committed it or pushed it or whatever. Yeah. Read my code back to this duck. And an effort to make sure that the duck understood it. And if the duck couldn't understand it, right? Like, because just the act of you trying to vocalize what code you're, because there's a whole lot of different, thought processes and context switching and things that actually go into that. So I think that's a huge aspect of code quality as well.
David, you just need to promise us you're going to let us know when the duck talks back, right?
Well,
it's called rubber duck coding. It's a very look it up.
Duck coding.
Yeah.
But
oh my God.
You just said something that's really interesting because it reminded me of, because I spent a lot of time writing, and my books and my blogs and things like that. And I'm a featured writer in C# Corner. And so I release a new article every 2 weeks. I try to do. And, I have to say the best feature that Word has done in the last 20 years is read aloud, right? I catch so many of my English problems by just having that thing read the article back to me many, many times, right? I catch so many things, and maybe I need to contact Mads and have him do that, as an add-in to Visual Studio to read your code. That's excellent. I'm gonna talk to Mads and ask him if he wants to do that.
Actually, with CodePilot, because CodePilot has like the contextual, like semantic models, they have like ways to actually vocalize it, like as humans would read it and understand it. So it's not just like the code itself. Yeah. That would be a great idea. I love that. And I too have shared in the past my excitement about reading aloud because, blogging and, I'm writing a book now myself, and any of those activities, like having, it read back to you again, you do catch so many like grammatical things or, ooh, that sounds weird when it's read back to you. But yeah, it's the same principle.
Yeah. I'm actually going back to some of my older articles and changing them because of that feature. I mean, that's the number one feature in Word, if you ask me, is that right now, at least. So anyway, we got off track a little bit, but so we were talking about the editor config, doing it during build and then during the build process. The one thing I want to say is that, and we probably have a lot of questions I'm going to have to go back and read after the show, but the one thing because there is so much to the editor config and all these other things that we have available to us now, many developers get confused on what to do, what to use, where they need to look. And unfortunately, I think that causes a lot of people just not to do anything, right? They stick with whatever the default editor config is that Visual Studio creates, and that's it, right? So, and this is why I talked about at the very beginning that code quality starts with us, because we have to be cognizant of, we need to learn these things and make sure they're in our project so we can release code, quality code. And I think, David, you were talking about earlier is that, one thing I'd like to talk about a lot of times is that, a lot of the things we're doing, like unit testing, code quality, XML documentation of your code, those are important now so you can release your product and hopefully, it doesn't have any exceptions and things like that. But it's even more important to me to the future, right? And this is why teams need to spend a little bit more time now preparing for the future, right? Because all that code is going to be looked at some point in the future and fixed or features added to and things like that. And when you don't build code quality and good documentation and things like that into your code, that process later down the road, 6 months, a year, 2 years, there's people still working on, code that was written 20 years ago, right? And so we need to make sure that people 10 years from now can understand what we're doing and make sure it's easy for them in the future, right? Because we're probably not going to be around, right? But we need to make sure it's there.
So I think there were some questions. I think we started to answer them. Like one is like how the editor config helps with code quality.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to see like how from there you hit analyze and now what?
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to show you that. So when you do, so there's a couple ways, like I said, to do the analytics. And so the one thing I always recommend is you go in every project you do. And, the funny story with this is most companies I go into, I do this and then they turn it off, which really bugs me. And this is a test project, so I don't have it set up. So, but this is where you need to go for all of your projects, right? You need to turn on run on build, right? Because that will make sure every time you build, these errors and warnings will come up, because you need to fix them now, right? Not when after you've checked it in, and not a week or two later. You need to do it now before it goes into source control, right? And also, I also turn on live analysis, so it constantly tells me, and that might, depending on how fast your computer is, and mine is a bit old, and I need to get a new one, will slow things down a little bit, but you need to do it. You need to see what you're doing wrong immediately, and so that helps with that. And then the other thing I do, I select all these, and then I select the analytic level, depending kind of on the type of project, right? So if it's like an assembly, just a DLL, I'll pick latest recommended. But if it's like an executable or a website, I do all, because that traps some more extra security things that you won't see in assemblies. And so basically what I'm saying is go in and check all these things and make sure, it's either recommended or all there. And once you do that, I'm
gonna check my projects right after the show.
Yeah. And and unfortunately, I've gone into projects and the next day after I do this, developers tell me we've turned it off because it's slowing down the build too much. It's painful. And my response is good. It should be painful until we fix this, right? And so now once you've done that, you can do it on the build, but I'm not going to do right now. But you can also run code analysis on the solution or the current project you're on, right?
Hey, David, I don't want to derail you too far, but I've been having a conversation in the chat here real quick with somebody who we can't figure out where's the error highlighting coming from in your Solution Explorer. There, is that an extension, or is that a setting we don't know about, or what is that?
The error highlighting? What do you mean?
You got red squiggles in Solution Explorer, and I don't think I've ever seen those before.
Oh, I think that's from CodeRush.
Gotcha.
I think that's from CodeRush, because I use CodeRush from DevExpress as my refactoring tool, and a lot of that stuff comes from CodeRush. Yeah, okay, that's where I think it's coming from.
So I was sharing that just recently. Sorry to interject. I was just going to say the fact that people always ask about like, oh, what fonts do you have? Or, oh, how is this thing highlighted? And it happens all the time too with VS Code. There should be like an easier mechanism to share your like configuration that way, just to say, boom, export, there it is. You can look at it and have it.
Well, not only that, there, even within Visual Studio, there should be an easier way to tell where, those violations are coming from, right? Because sometimes, go ahead.
Oh, no. How do you have an image in your C# file? What?
That's a feature in CodeRush.
Oh my God. I was just going to say, wait, what is this I'm looking at?
Yeah. So CodeRush has a thing now that you can embed images now. And as you can see, I'm using it for basically marketing. But when you look at a video done by Mark Miller, who's, part of CodeRush, and I've known Mark for a really long time, what he does is if he has a method that has really complicated calculations and things like that, if that calculation came from some kind of image you can see, you can embed that right at the top of the method or anywhere in your code. Really, you can embed it anywhere in your code. But yeah, that's what that is. And it's really just a bunch of I have to turn it off, but it's just a string right here. Right? So if you don't have CodeRush, it just looks like a weird string with a URL, because this is actually this links to my website. If you clicked on it, it'll actually bring up the browser and go to my website. So it's a marketing thing. For me, at least.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was like, wait a second. What kind of weird universe have we entered here?
Yeah, and I will mention that CodeRush is now free, so there's no excuse not to use a refactoring tool like CodeRush. So so anyway, once you run analysis, right, then you have to go through the chore of fixing everything, right? And of course, the analysis, if people haven't used it a lot, show up in either messages, warnings, or errors. Of course, the errors are the biggest ones. Warnings to me are always like a yellow light. They need to be taken care of because they're probably going to be an issue in the later. Information, I mean, messages are usually just more style things or spelling things and things like that. So there's still something you should look at, but it's not usually messages aren't super important. So for this analysis for the show, one of the things I want to bring up is that, I've analyzed millions of lines of code because it seems like this is what code qualities are, is kind of my job these days, even though that's not what I'm hired for. And the number one issue I see that hurts programming, hurts applications, is not properly handling dispose issues and not properly handling memory. Every team, every project I get hired for has memory issues. And even the last, so here's a scenario I do almost every time I start a new company. I look at their code, and the number one I always see is not handling dispose issues properly. I go back into the manager and I say, so do you have any servers and things like that you have to reboot on the back end every once in a while? You don't really understand why? This is why, right? And in the last project I was working on, which I have some stats for, they were rebooting servers multiple times a day because of this problem, right? So this was my talk at the Code Quality Conference on Friday, so you can go look at that. But this is the number one issue I see. So I kind of wanted to show you not only where it shows up, but how you fix it. And so you can see right here, a call to iDisposable an object on memory stream. Basically, every object that ends in stream is disposable and is an issue, right? And so if you just double click on it, for those of you who are asking, it will take you right to the problem here, right? And so here I have two problems in here. I have memory stream that's not being disposed of. It's just being newed up here. So I can, what does this do? It does some compression. And I also have a gzip stream. Like I said, everything ending in stream is disposable, and at least for Microsoft. And so these two things need to be disposed of, right? And how you dispose of things have changed, the 20 years of .NET. But basically, this is what you need to do now. And what I do is I use CodeRush to make it really easy on me. And I just go over here and I say introduce using statement. So the best defense against this, for those of you who haven't used the using statement or don't really understand what it does, this is what you need to do, right? And sorry, my computer's a bit slow. And so you use the using statement. What happens and what happens when this code is compiled? Using statement is just a shortcut for a try finally, right? Because if you do have a dispose issue, you want to make sure the cleanup happens, even if there was an exception in the code block, right? And so before we had the using statement, we had to write try catches everywhere, which was kind of messy, because it was just a lot of extra code. So, and in my talk on Friday, I show you in IL exactly they are using try finally, right? So what happens is when you new the memory stream up here, right, as soon as it gets to the end of the code block right here, .NET will automatically call dispose on the object, right? And that's super important. That's one thing I said in my talk on Friday, is that you need to call dispose as soon as you're done with the object, right? No matter where that is in the code, because what that does is it removes the pointer to that object in memory. And then when a garbage collector wakes up and decides to do a memory collection, then that object has no pointers and it will be taken out of memory, right? The longer you wait to call dispose, the longer that's going to live in memory, right? And it will live in memory even more if you have a finalizer, because that gets moved to a different queue and happens later. So, but this is the way you fix those kind of issues. Is you just go in here, and like I said, you can do it yourself, or you can use come on. There you go. You can just use refactoring and do it that way. So the cool thing with the using statement is that, using statements are nestable. You can nest as many as you want. And that's how you take care of the dispose issues.
I think this brings up a great point. We had a commenter in the chat point out that, managed languages are great because you don't have to worry about memory management. But then the problem is you're not worrying about memory management and it comes back to bite you, right?
Yes.
So just like all of you, like entry-level intermediate developers out there who haven't really looked at the garbage collector yet, definitely like take some time out of your schedule and get some understanding of that garbage collector and understand where it's going to bite you and how you can avoid like David was saying earlier, the scenario where you have to reboot the server a couple of times a day.
Yeah. It's the thing about it, I'm not sure how well this is taught in schools anymore. And when I taught at the university, I taught this the very first C# beginner class. I rammed into their heads exactly how the garbage collector works, right? And I was lucky enough to have one of the people who worked on the garbage collector twice at my user group here. And so I learned a lot from him when he was here. But one of the great things about .NET is the managed memory, and .NET takes care of a lot of the memory handling for you. But we still need to be cognizant of this, because what if you don't properly do the dispose, what that will cause is virtual memory leaks, right? And that will bring your servers down, or it'll bring your app down on somebody's computer, right? And we don't want that. And so we have to learn about this. And even when I've interviewed, hundreds of software engineers, and the question I ask every single one is, explain to me how the garbage collector works, right? Because if they can't do it, I'm probably not going to hire them.
It's funny you mentioned that. So I always tell the story about how I came to Microsoft, how I literally applied to 100 jobs and I got hired on the application number 87. So I was still applying after I interviewed, right? And the closest I came before I got hired, the reason they didn't hire me was because I didn't understand the garbage collector. Mm-hmm. And then about a year later, I interviewed for the same job again and had studied up on the garbage collector and understood it. And that was actually why they hired me at that point, is because I had that knowledge. So,
yeah. Well, I was lucky to have one of the guys who wrote the garbage collector at my user group twice. And when .NET came out, I can still remember, because when .NET came out, because I was in production with .NET a year before it came out. Oh, I was in production beta 1 of .NET. And so because I was a really early adopter of .NET, and there wasn't a lot of documentation of anything in the early days, is I spent hours and hours learning about the garbage collector and learning how it works and when it works and what it does and all the different heaps and things like that. But I did that a lot because I was the beginning and I was trying to understand this new land of, memory management. So, so that's how you refactor, issues like that. And so you can go through all those errors here, which, you should not check in any code that's got errors like this, right? If you have errors, don't commit it. Don't commit it. And so that kind of gets into my workflow, right? My workflow basically simply is that, number one, I code all the time with quality in mind, right? Number two, before I check in anything, I run analysis on that code, right? And whether that's analyze, whether that's analyze in Visual Studio, I use other tools also. I don't have it up right now, but I also use Ndepend, and I have it off right now because of memory. And there's SonarLint. There's lots of other different tools, but usually before I check anything in, I run it through two tools, right? Because each tool finds different things and one finds more than the other and things like that. So I always run it through two tools, right? before I even check it in. So, but I forgot one important thing here, and that is before I even do that, and this is important for mostly for the future, is before I do that, I XML document everything, right? And you can see my XML commenting right here, which I don't see a lot of people do, and including the Microsoft framework. I mean, the .NET Core doesn't do a lot of this anymore. But I document every single method in my projects. Now, when I talk about this, you should always document public and protected, right? That should be the minimum. But I document everything. And what this does is it basically sets up what this method is supposed to be doing, what the parameters do, what it returns. You know, it'll also I don't know if I have one here. It'll also show the here it is, the exceptions that will be thrown. And this is really, really important because that shows up in IntelliSense, right? So I don't know how many times I've been looking at a method or something like that, and I go, well, what exceptions does this method throw? So I can trap for them, right? And that's because they're not documented like this.
Yeah,
right?
I do exactly the same thing on like projects where I know like no one else is going to look at this code. This is even just my code.
Right.
I'll use the / XML docs just so like IntelliSense lights up in other projects and other files. I know what I'm looking at.
Yeah, and here I was thinking about this morning too, and here's what here's a recommendation I would give the Visual Studio team. You need to buy this product. Let me show you why. It'll happen in a second here. Come on. There. You see that? I wiped out the documentation and it automatically was re-added, right? And so I use a tool that's been around for a long time in .NET land called GhostDoc, right? And there's a free version and 2 paid versions. I, of course, have the enterprise version with the super spell checking in it and things like that. But the cool thing about GhostDoc is you can go up here. Here, I'll even remove this for you. You can go up here, and this is what I use all the time. I go document file, and what that does is it documents all the methods that you have, in your file, and adds the appropriate style cop header to the top of your file. Right, and you'll see that in a second because this has got 64 members.
So out of curiosity, like how far does that get you in terms of like having meaningful XML content? Because I've always been a fan of / comments, but I also am a proponent of self-documenting code. So it's kind of a pet peeve of mine to, for example, this right here, where it says the method name is compute SHA-256 hash. And then it says, the summary is computes the SHA-256 hash. So I'm not learning anything else, right?
Sure.
So like what does it do? Like what's some of the internals? So like, do you ever spend time going back in here and actually making these comments more beefy? Or
I do.
Okay.
And it really depends on the method. Like some methods are very. I do a lot of commenting. Like I even put examples of how to use it. I put examples of the output, things like that. You could all put in this documentation and actually have a ticket in with Visual Studio right now to surface the example tag in IntelliSense. So when you look at a method, you'll also see an example of how to use it right there. You don't have to go look somewhere. And so I'm working, that's actually being reviewed right now. So there's a couple important things, right? Yes, all code should be self-documenting. That's true. It should be like that. If you use proper coding standards, right, and including the ones that are in my book, because I have a pure coding standards book out there. If you use good coding standards, good naming, GhostDoc will write most of it for you, right? And then you just go in and add the flavor, to the documentation, right? GhostDoc also has a feature that every time it does add, a comment block at the top of a method, it will also add a to-do. So that will surface the to-do section, so you can go back and then add your extra text, right? But GhostDoc makes it so easy. There's no excuse for people not be doing it, right? So my workflow really starts with documentation, making sure the code is formatted correctly, documented correctly. Then I run it through code analysis, right? And then I'll check it in, right? I have a couple more steps depending on, the type of project and things like that. But that's basically it in a nutshell, right? I don't release anything with errors. I don't release anything that's not documented, and I don't release and I do the analysis on it by at least two products before I check it in, right? And that saves me from getting QA tickets, and it saves me from people going, Dave doesn't know how to code right, So
David, I'll just give you a little bit of a time check here. We've got about 5 minutes.
I know we're running short.
We are running short, and you have got a lot of good information. So
I could talk all day about this.
I know you could, and I certainly would hope you will come back and tell us more, because it sounds like you have a. Yeah, it sounds like you have you could probably do 5 or 6 shows on this for us.
Yes, I will come back anytime you want me to, because this is I can't talk about hardly anything in an hour, right? And so that's why I do spend a lot of time writing, and a lot of this, like I wrote 3 very, very comprehensive articles about Dispose on my website last year, and it will tell you everything you need to know about not only catching Dispose issues, but implementing iDisposable. Because I had one project I worked on that they had disposable types in fields in their classes, and so they had 90 classes that were either not disposing of those fields, or they'd implemented iDisposable incorrectly. And in one solution, 90 classes, right? And in the same solution, they had over 600 places where they were calling dispose properly.
Yeeks.
Right. Just 600. And all this caused over 2,000 what I call touch points that I'm going to have to change and check in and go through code review and all that stuff. So, and all of this is because it wasn't done in the beginning. Yeah.
So kind of like the old saying, ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And that's, once you get this ingrained in your head, right? It becomes a lot easier to just code this way all the time, right? And so you're not making these mistakes, and you're just relying on those things that you might have missed. That's kind of where I am at this point.
So you have a website and you have several books on this topic. Can you throw that up on the screen real quick so folks can see it?
Yeah. So my website is, let me see, let me go here, is .nettips.com. Easy to remember. So there's my website. And if you want to pick up a copy of my book, it's right there at the top. I'm in my 7th edition of my coding standards book. I first released it in 2005. And now it's the biggest self-published book I've ever done. It's pretty big now. It's over 300 pages, I think. And I'm constantly working on new versions of that. I also have a code performance book out there. I don't know if I have it on the top of this page. I think I have it under Rock Your Code. So I have my code performance book. So there's my coding standards. That's my coding standards. There it is. There's my code performance book. So I'm in the 2nd edition of my code performance book. I'm right now every night running benchmarks for .NET 7, and we'll be sharing that soon. If you buy my code performance book, 100% of the proceeds goes to help the kids that live in the slums in India. So I don't make any money off this book.
Outstanding.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about performance at all really in this hour, but performance is super, super important, especially for the cloud now, because that's how you get charged. So not only is it important for your user experience, right, but it's even more important for your pocketbook, right? And so we have to be cognizant of these two things, and that's why I've made code performance and code quality. That's basically all I talk about nowadays.
Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this episode to a close. Certainly, we would love to have you back, David. You
Sure.
are a wealth of information, and I've noticed that our viewers they've just been going nuts in the chat here with all kinds of questions and comments. It's one of the most engaged episodes we've had in a while.
Wow.
So we very much appreciate that, and would love to have you back, and would love to have you talk more.
Thanks. And
So-
everybody watching right now, go to you can tweet me and ask me your questions. I'm going to go back and look at this afterwards, and I'll try to contact you if I can, but please tweet me at real.netdave. I'm more than happy to help you in any way I can.
Excellent, and I'm sure people will, because this is a very highly engaged audience we've had today.
That's great
So-
for Monday.
Yeah, right. So with that, I want to thank everyone for watching on .NET Live. This is a labor of love by 5 people in Microsoft and 1 former Microsoft person. We put a lot of time into making this stream what it is for our community, and we really are glad that we have you here with us every Monday. Check out other great .NET Live TV streams and videos at .net/live. And next week, we currently don't have a show on the schedule. If that changes, I'm sure you'll see that on .net or youtube.com. Otherwise, we will see you all in 2 weeks. Have a good week, everybody, and thank you for tuning in.
Thanks for inviting me.